as has been shown. But he's an emergency medicine and EMS physician from Stockholm. Now, he does a lot of human factors training, and I think I was saying to someone yesterday that every time before I get up to speak, I still feel nervous, no matter how many years I've been doing it for, no matter how many talks I give. And I think that's quite a common thing. And before I get out of the aircraft or the car to go to a job, the last thing that goes through my head is, John, don't screw up. And Mantas, you're going to talk to us, getting ready for your talk. No stress, no problems, right? So, yeah, so you're going to talk to us about stress.
Well, hello everyone. Do you hear me? Is the mic working? That's number one factor from today, right? Then my kids usually used to tell me, probably there is some YouTube or TikTok thing, that the whole life might be a simulation. Think about this for a second. The topic of my talk will be stress. I mean, that brought it to my mind. That it really could be a simulation. I didn't know that I will step on this. Maybe someone made it up. No, it's like just a short detour to Ross's way about metacognition, right? But first, actually, I want to rewind to the state where we were before this happened. You still remember it? You heard a talk before. And that was my, because I also thought about what I will do after that talk with you. Where will I pick you up? And I want to do that now. Can you try to focus on what do you feel right now? Individually. Yeah, it needs some time. Does any of you who would be maybe happy to share or to raise a hand feel anything physical in their bodies? Connect, which you can connect to emotions. I'll leave it at that. Okay? But that was a thing which I will try to pick up a bit later in the talk. I will not talk too much about it, but that's important in this type of education which we do and which I'm going to talk to you about. So, the title of my talk is Stress, Where Do We Come From and Where Can We Go If We Feel Like? And I am an emergency physician in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm a current medical lead of a clinical training center for the ambulance, and I'm working as a physician on the road ambulance support unit. And I also, the educational things which I did, we are doing at Karolinska Institute, so I acknowledge them there too. So, you know, stress. Now it's another type of thing. Maybe you can interact with me a little bit. What do you think when you hear the word stress? What is it for you? Can you shout out? Haha, there is a haha. Okay, we take this one. There is a haha. More. Stimulation, anxiety, more. Coping. Cold fingers. Good. What? Performance. Yes. Focus. Fear of public speaking. Burnout. Yeah, that's a number, right? And that's kind of exactly the point. It's a definition, a word, a concept, which elicits a lot of thoughts and can actually be understood and used in many ways. And that's a bit of a problem when you try to deal with this, as with many other concepts, because people genuinely can use the same word to describe very different things. At the same time, this is a very important subject for us, or isn't it? I think it is, right? I'm not gonna try to prove that with any type of data. I think that we can agree that this is an important part of our daily lives and professional lives. So I'll take it from that. But it's important to agree on a definition here. And by stress from now, I mean the response to a stressor, because someone might use stress as a stressor too, right? So we talk about stress now like as a response to a stressor. And why have we been talking about this so much right now? Hasn't it been always like this, that we had stress in our lives? Or has it just become more like this now? Does it feel more like this now? I really don't have an answer, and this is not a discussional talk, but I would say that my best guess is that we have evolved to this point as a society, and we have that type of information sharing today, that we do talk about this, and we do feel this, and we do have this concept in front of our eyes. So it's about a time, and the time has come that we have to do something about it, maybe more than we do right now. And I would say that it is a part of the task in our everyday job. And especially for, maybe even more for those who are here. For many of us, it is a part of everyday task, but for us, it's a task which we cannot avoid, which we get every day, no matter how much we prepare. And because we are hardwired for this in our responses. I will not prove that either. There is a lot of data about this. So it's just a question of a dose. Everyone will eventually get out of the zone. So I think it's important that if we as physicians are about to do our jobs as physicians, as medical personnel of all kinds, that we should be prepared for this. So let's take it from there. Have you ever heard about talking about hard and soft skills? Technical and non-technical skills? I would like to refer to the beautiful talk which we heard earlier on Thursday about the power of words. I think it's very important also what we do, what we say affects our minds. And I would more maybe like to talk about some essential skills which we have, which are both maybe technical, non-technical, or hard or soft, if you like. I asked Dali, because it's so, it's so fashionable to have those images now. So I thought that I must prove that I'm within the safe. I asked Dali just with a very simple prompt to make an image of soft and hard skills. And I actually really liked it, if you look at this. So it must still, at least the artificial intelligence is aware of the importance, I think, or it has been part of the common crawl. But what is our foundation? Where do we stand at this? And my question to ask here is, how many students do we have in the audience? Thank you. I know that there are actually Australian students in Wollongong right now looking at this, because a friend of mine has engaged them in this learning activity. So he wanted me to say hi to them. While I'm asking about students, I would also like to ask about trainees, not like, consultants. Do we have trainees in the audience? Yeah, I see some hands. And the rest are consultants. How many of you consultants are senior? How many of you are bosses of anything? Yeah. So all of you interact actually in this. Where do we come from? What do we teach, and how do we teach? So how many of you have received training in this on as a part of your curriculum? Nice. 6 hands. That's fantastic. Was it, just out of interest, was it like systematic, long, or was it like short interventions? Yeah, all the years in university. Cool. I want to hear more about this because I want to, I'll show you. I tried at least to go to the research data, and it looked a bit different. But it's just 4 hands. I would still say that this foundation which we stand on is not that solid, maybe, and it has definitely cracks in it. So, okay, there is a scooping review of this. And I know Ross doesn't really like that, but I did put some text on this because I think that's not the common knowledge. So we all might benefit from reading this. So the scooping review, it identified 12 interventions which how our medical institutions support the well-being of undergraduate students. And most prevalent were mindfulness-based programs. Other approaches included a theater elective, equine therapy, and systematic encouragement of physical activity. Curriculum changes were done in 2 cases and reflection groups in 2 cases. And actually, most of the interventions were longitudinal. So I don't want to make fun out of the equine therapy. Actually not. It's a really, it has a very important place of this, but still what is lacking is actually training which would use evidence which exists in this field. So what can we do about that foundation? I will tell a short story of what we did and how we did. And the point is not to shed light on too much on me, on ourselves, but I still want to acknowledge this because that's where it started for me. These were the conferences, and at those conferences we had speakers who were the ones who caught my mind when I was a trainee. Because I was like, okay, that's so evident and no one is doing anything about it. So, I mean, I could name the names, but they know who they are. Mike Gloria, Chris Hicks, Natalie May, Simon was sitting there, and a lot of other people. And so what did I do about it? Was that I got back home to Sweden. I was like, this is so obvious, so someone should be doing things about it. But no, there was nothing available in our university. So what I did then is that we ended up in getting an educational grant together with my colleagues, whom I will show later on, to make novel teaching methods in teaching stress on a person-centered learning way through simulation for medical students. Yeah, and I did this together, and from now on I really want to talk about us all, not about me, because this is us all 4 have been doing this. So Mats is a professor in ergonomics. He's trained physician, but never worked as one. He has PhD in anatomy and physiology related subject, and he has had a profound interest in stress. Mini is internal medicine physician, working a lot in the emergency room, as it is in Sweden, and she's responsible for the soft, non-technical skill education, as you can say, throughout the whole medical program at Karolinska Institute. And Walter has double specialty. He's both a cardiologist and a psychiatrist, because his cardiology interest comes from, and he has defended his thesis in HRV, heart rate variability. And we did our work at Karolinska Institute at a simulation center there. So what did we do? We made a course for students, an elective, which is called like the Stress Management, a Key Competence, Theory and Practice. And this course runs for 2 weeks, twice a year. Students selected. So we do have a very selection bias. We do have very motivated students. We get 12 students on the course, and we have them for 2 weeks. We have 12 students, and it's about 10 of us involved in the course. Okay? So this is really nothing which I have the luxury of having in my daily practice in the ambulance or in the hospital. And we are very aware of that. It's like a boutique setting. But at the same time, we were able to draw some very interesting conclusions from this. And this was like an exploration lab for us. How do you do this type of teaching and what can you learn? And I feel that this needs to be shared. So all of this, what I'm saying, I mean, this is available to you all. So just get in touch with us. We will be happily sharing what we have learned. And I will present some of the things. So how did we arrange the course? It's three main parts. We do a lot of seminars and lectures on theory behind like all the physiology, psychology, and most likely work environmental aspects, which we deal with stress. Then we move on, or in parallel, we move on to individual simulations where we test out different stressors for the students and debrief them on this by trying to go to the level where you can start, feel stressed, be comfortable about it, and try to reflect on how do you personally feel. And then at the latest, we will move on to full group, full scale simulation. So that's how it looks like when they do the individual sims, because in that simulation center, we do have lab sims available. So we do a gamification exercise where they also compete between them. And at exactly at this point, we start introducing visual stressors, sound stressors, and so on, and we debrief them. We have tried many things during the times. Here you see them competing in who will make the nicest stitch. And I was actually going around and measuring it with a ruler. And at this exactly moment, what do they do? What do you think? They're visualizing. That's what exactly they're using in this moment. And when we are done with that part, and when we have them more on board, then we go on full scale simulation scenarios. And how do we design that? The challenge was not to focus the debrief too much on the medical and on the CRM parts. We still keep them correct, and we do need to spend a lot of time on them, but we try to focus throughout the full scale sims on the learning objectives of feeling the stressor and trying to deal with that. And I mean, I think we have really succeeded on that, because you will see the some of the course evaluations. The important part of this is actually debrief, which takes a long time. And in order to be able to debrief, you have to establish psychological safety. We were very fortunate to use the facilities which are available at that simulation center. They went after the concept of Professor Jenny Rudolph, which we might know of. Have you heard about that? Safe container. That's also DALI. And it was a very simple prompt. So this, for those who you don't know, so the safe container is like, basically easily explained, like a notion of creating a space where you feel safe, comfortable, and where you will allow yourself to be challenged, and where you will feel comfortable to challenge other people. The thing is that it takes time. It is very laborious if you want to do it from scratch, or at least if you want to learn how to do it. And but this was, I would say, like the most important part of what we did. Now I will also spend some time with you to read through a couple of evaluations which the students left. I translated them, and I want to read you in the whole, because they do reflect the emotion what the students get. Okay, so Ross, don't kill me. I'm using text. Oh, so I will read it loud. Incredibly relevant content, very educational, plenty of time to practice and strengthen practical skills. One has had the opportunity to develop such important competencies to handle the stress that we all will encounter in our future jobs as doctors. Additionally, very kind, good, and competent teachers. Coffee bread. I edited it for fika. This is not coffee bread. This is like a social interaction opportunity every day. Fun course, lovely group. I hold the summer vacation sacred, but would actually have gladly replaced 2 weeks of vacation with 2 weeks of extended course. It's probably the first and last time that feeling will arise during the years at Karolinska Institutet. If you choose this course, you will love it and be so satisfied with your choice. I didn't make this up. There is source data on this, but this was really, really lovely to read. Another one was that we had the opportunity to challenge and to push ourselves in an environment that was also safe. That during the course, we had the opportunity to get to know ourselves and our own stress reactions better. Incredibly important information and practice. It should be a mandatory course as it provides doctors who feel better and work better. Ultimately, it also becomes important for patients and society. The team that conducted the course did an incredible job and were very engaged. Keep it up. Okay. I know this is like cherry picking. Of course, maybe there were some people who were dissatisfied with the course. We had 80 students so far, and this is an elective. But our overall impression was that this was making a change, and we have more interviews and reviews of people who have actually reconsidered not leaving the medicine, thanks God, but they reconsidered their choices of possible career path early on. And I think that is very important to think about what you do when you have this type of education. And to give you some keywords to take home and to look at this, because I am not dwelling on this too much in this talk. This is like a separate subject. Emotional intelligence, emotional competence, and emotional awareness are also terms which can be used almost like to describe the same type of thing. But we found that using this approach to explore stress and stress reaction was the most important thing to do for the students in simulation and debrief. But it is laborious, it takes time, but we think it's worth it. Another take-home message from us is that it is very important not to dwell into corporate mindfulness, if you have heard about that. That it's a danger when you teach us these kind of things is to focus everything on self. That it's your problem, you have to be better, you have to fix this. There's a lot of responsibility on the other levels, which contribute both to harming this situation and helping this situation out. Like we have here, we do have bosses and we do have trainees. Yeah, and what we have achieved here is actually, and what we have done at Karolinska University is that the educational goal on stress has already been for several years, and now there will be in the new curriculum for all undergraduate medical students. And a teaching activity around this will occur at least twice throughout the whole medical program. And we will have at least one more elective. And I think that's the important part in this type of education, to get it to be it also a part of education as it is a part of our work. And about equine therapy, I have been talking more. In our course, we focus mostly on personal stress handling techniques when we do it in CPR situations. And we do touch upon on the big part of the stress spectrum, which is burnout, and which is recovery, and which is resilience, and which is also, of course, performance. For me, this tree of contemplative practices was a very good way to look at all those things which might appear on the tabloids, oh, this is the ultimate solution for your stress. Of course, this is not ultimate solution for like equine therapy or labyrinth walking or pilgrimage. Maybe not the solution for all, but it might be a solution which fits someone. And by analyzing those kind of diagrams, you might get even new ideas. What do you need for your recovery and for your resilience? So maybe there is not a big difference between those two foundations, but I would say that you can spot the difference. Maybe the second one is a bit higher, a bit more flat, still has some cracks, but has a different surface. I believe that that's how we can go if we want to, if we feel like. And the safe container is important in medical education, very much of importance. We do have the privilege when we do this for undergrads. Now, the biggest challenge for me is how do I move from this to this? Yeah, because this is a real challenge. We are underfinanced. We are stressed. But I think we will be able to do this. And I hope that you can get inspired to do this too. Because you do have a lot of knowledge and you do have a lot of practice. And some of you, and many of you, probably has a lot of awareness about this too. And you can feed this practice into that undergraduate education, because what we found was that this was so important to start early. In the beginning, I wanted to, of course, I was focused on ourselves. I wanted to do those educational activities for our own providers and thought that this would just be a stepping stone. But this proved to be a very good lab. And I hope that we can also arrive here someday.
Thank you very much. A lot of food for thought there. So I was just wondering, when you, at the moment, you have students coming through that are selecting to do this course. And as you say, in the future, you'll move towards it becoming a mandatory course that everybody does. The two questions. One is, do you think that will change the makeup when people are told to do something rather than choosing to do something? And what happens after they leave med school? What happens for their stress inoculation? Well, not inoculation, but their stress training after that?
Thank you. That's a very good question. This will have to be different from what we are doing now. We see this, what we have done, we see this as a pool, as a lab of different ways to approach the problem. There is a totally different approach if you are told to do something. We know this, everyone who does sim education, you know that you have completely different groups of people coming who are there for an obligatory course and who are for the course which they have chosen themselves. I believe that the most important thing you can do is to raise awareness, and still you will have to leave to kick the ball out for the people to take that for themselves. But raising awareness can be done, and it can be done in mandatory way, exactly as we do it for all types of other medical education. What will happen with people when they leave? I didn't really get it. You mean, I mean, yeah. But you mean after we've done something obligatory? Mm, well, I think we need to talk very much more about this and advocate for systematic training in stress education, because right now I'm afraid that the options are very few, scarce, and very like people. We feel that we want to do something, but we really don't know how and why. So I hope that the awareness can be raised, and then there certainly are other educators out there who have been done similar things. So maybe we can share. I will run the mic too.
Mantas, congratulations for this intervention and change in your curriculum, right? um, the the course is supposed to change behavior. Is that correct? Are you following up with your students? Do you interview them and check if it actually has an effect later on during their studies or in their work?
Don't say anything yet.
Thank you. Yes, we do have a research on this. We have been not able to do of very much of this research due to the resources available to us so far, which we have there. But yes, we are following up our students. Who the thing is though that this intervention was not really designed to change the behavior because changing behavior is, I would say, this is way too short intervention. What you need more systemic and repetitive interventions to change behavior, and you need to design this other way. This was more, the intervention was more like a lab. We did what we could there at that point, and we found out some interesting things along our way.
Any other questions? Thank you very, very much. It was an amazing talk. Thank you. And for demonstrating the stress before the talk. So our final speaker for the morning is another returning speaker, it's Vahe. He sounds American, but he is actually Swiss, he tells me. He works in Boston, just outside Basel. No, Boston Medflight in the US. And he's been a critical care paramedic there for a number of years. And over the past couple of years has transitioned into also doing some high threat work for some of the federal agencies. Now, what he's going to speak to us about this morning is some of the group decisions we make. And as my mother-in-law likes to tell me, actions have consequences, and the decisions we make have consequences. And cheese is one of those consequences. But it's a decision that we made as a group together to do this, and we do this every year. And I do always wonder on the morning, why did I eat so much cheese? But maybe Vahe can give us that answer.
Thanks very much. Can everybody hear me okay? I just want to make sure I have the distance sorted out here. Thanks so much again for inviting us and some very thoughtful discussions today. A lot of focus has been sort of on self and individual practice and trying to sort of encourage for reflection upon our own practice. I am going to shift towards something else, which is about decision-making, collective decision-making. In January 28th, 1986, the Challenger space shuttle was waiting at the Cape Canaveral in Florida. It was a rather unusual circumstance. Florida is historically known as a very tropical place. For example, people who live in Boston who get quite old end up actually living in Boston during the summer, and then during winter, then they all go down to Florida for a couple months, and it becomes sort of what they do. And unusually cold air had made its way down to Florida. Normally, it would be about 50 to 60, sometimes 70 degrees in January, believe it or not. Rather different from Zermatt. That day, it is 36 degrees Fahrenheit, which in real metric, actual measurement units, is about 3 to 4 degrees centigrade, in a rather unusual circumstance. The Challenger is actually an engineering marvel. Its predecessor was a single-use device, a rocket, that would effectively, during its departure and into orbit, would fall apart in a sequential and systematic manner, and each piece was single use. Some parts would find themselves just orbiting around for a certain number of years before finally they would re-enter Earth and splash, hopefully, into the ocean. But there was a single use device. The shuttle was a different idea. There was an idea of efficiency and of cost savings by building a system where obviously there is an orbiter and a shuttle that is able to be launched up into orbit, but that then is also intentionally made to be able to re-enter and come back down to Earth like a plane. Obviously, I suspect all of you grew up seeing some of this footage. In order to be able to make it into orbit, though, that device simply lacked enough thrust to be able to get up into space and into orbit, and was composed of 4 fundamental pieces. You had the actual shuttle, the orbiter, the reentry vehicle, that was mounted and matted to a very large fuel tank and 2 solid rocket boosters. Each individual solid rocket booster generated 3.3 million foot-pounds of thrust. And in real metric units and units of measurement, that's an unbelievable amount, a shit ton, might I say. There's and each of these rockets posed a particular challenge. They're actually the most powerful rocket ever made to be used to send man into space, and required an immense amount of fuel supply. And as a result, there were fuel tanks that were mounted to the outside. These solid rocket boosters generated 85% of the actual thrust and provided the lift for the first 2 to 2.5 minutes of the launch. And then at a certain point, when fuel hit a certain status and was exhausted, they would actually separate from the actual shuttle and end up coming back to Earth and actually would be reused. At the tip of them, they had drogue parachutes and they would deploy, and not like what we see today where we've kind of gotten bored by the fact that somehow rockets are now able to land directly back onto the pad that they departed. These simply would splash into the ocean and would be recovered by ships and then would be inspected, prepared, cleaned, and if they passed inspection, they would be reused. And this was, again, sort of shifting away from an inefficient form of space flight towards more efficient and towards to be more cost saving. The problem is that the shuttle at this point is not fulfilling that goal. It's actually significantly over budget. It had required repeated refunding and sort of reissuance of funds from Congress, and there's a growing amount of pressure placed on NASA to actually continue to fund this. And the tragedy of the shuttle, frankly, is that it just kind of came at the wrong time and was a technology that was put in place at a time that was pretty inhospitable for creative programs and also expensive programs. This is the late 1970s into early 1980s, and economically, the United States was going through a very difficult time. And so there was growing pressure placed on NASA by Congress as well as the president. And at the time, Ronald Reagan was certainly paying very close attention because Congress was asking a lot of questions about why do we keep giving money for these damn rockets? NASA had committed to something, which is they had committed to the idea that we'll start flying more and we'll find other ways to fund things. Their goal was to fly 60 times a year, which doesn't sound like a lot to us, but it would mean that based on how long it takes to prepare one of these craft, they would actually be putting one back onto a launch pad every 3 days to prepare. An unbelievable pace of work, effectively unsustainable, frankly. This sort of lofty dream actually was unsustainable. And in 1986, the goal was to try to get 2 in a month, and that would have been seen as a success. And so they ended up having the Challenger here was delayed a series of times due to unforeseen circumstances, mostly involving weather, and was finally on January 28th seen as to be ready for flight. The conditions were seen to be acceptable for launch, and the team ended up boarding now for, I believe, what was the 4th time to try to actually be able to launch. The team was a little bit unusual as well. 7 astronauts, sort of. 6 astronauts, and a 7th who is actually a local to New Hampshire, just north of Boston, who was a teacher. And one of the reasons for having the teacher on board is that their intent was to have her teach science classes from space to encourage young children to be inspired to follow sciences and to also show that women can accomplish amazing things such as go to space. We already had women astronauts, obviously, going to space, but it was to try to inspire America. There was also another angle to it, which is it was also to try to inspire people to continue to be willing to fund such an initiative. And it launched, and 73 seconds into its flight, it unfortunately exploded. Many of you most likely either witnessed it live or otherwise saw footage of it as it played out throughout television screens. The day any of you in the from the United States were in school that day, most likely resulted in school cancellation. All 7 astronauts were killed tragically in the incident. The Rogers Commission that subsequently identified the cause of it found that there actually had been a fundamental design flaw. The solid rocket booster was made by a company called Tycho, and this engineering firm based out of Utah was able to underbid all of the competitors, including Lockheed Martin, which you've probably all heard of, and United, by proposing a system that was made up of different pieces that would be then joined together. And the advantage and the reason they were able to underbid by 100 million is that it would be very easy to be able to ship this. And they would simply be able to be put on a truck in different pieces, brought over, assembled, and then subsequently placed and matted onto the actual shuttle assembly. And what that meant is that you had the most powerful rocket ever that makes an unbelievable amount of power made up of different pieces that end up being joined. And in order to prevent any sort of leakage of any fuel that was in there, they had to have joints and O-rings. And the word O-ring is what we associate with the Challenger disaster. Those two black dots that you see that have basically been cut in cross-section are the two O-rings that keep two parts together. There's a primary O-ring and a secondary O-ring. And what was found was that under certain conditions, they would have a failure of the first O-ring and actually would have bleed through and burn through into the second O-ring. These conditions were actually first identified in 1977, 9 years before the disaster. It was actually found that even with every launch, there would be enough torque and so much power applied that it actually would cause it to fail to seat, but they had not had a burn-through event that was significant enough to cause for a critical event. But in the Challenger event, and Challenger disaster, they specifically identified that the launch conditions that day were unusual. And I had talked about it when I first opened. It was unusually cold. It was 3 or 4 degrees centigrade the day of launch. This is what the pad looked like that morning. The engineers were breaking ice off using sledgehammers. Everything was extremely slippery, and they were breaking ice off of the surface. And what the cold temperature did is it rendered the O-ring drier, more brittle, and as a result, when exposed to high pressures, it was not able to seat fully, and it resulted in a burn-through event. There's actually photos that show this happening as it still is just a couple 100 feet off the pad. That arrow is pointing out to a small black cloud. That is blow-by. That is both O-rings having failed, and now there is fuel, highly combustible fuel, that is actually leaking out of the outside of the solid rocket booster, which 73 seconds later, as this situation and this burn-by and this blow-by, deteriorated and worsened, suddenly it combusted. It resulted in the fuel tank, the orange fuel tank, the main fuel tank, to erupt, to combust, to explode. The two solid rocket boosters were separated from the actual Challenger, and the Challenger, tragically exposed to unbelievable G-forces, broke up in the air. And in order to understand how a problem that was identified in 1977 that then still was something that was allowed to continue for a while, you have to understand the context in which how the decisions were made. There was a decision made actually the night prior during a teleconference. 32 people gathered from 3 different locations, JPL in Alabama, Florida, as well as in Utah at Thiokol. And everybody gathered with the specific discussion of this problem, of these O-rings, and whether or not the temperature and the launch conditions that were anticipated the next morning would be so poor that as a result, this should potentially result in a mission cancellation. Should we cancel the launch was the purpose of this meeting. 32 people gathered in a room the night prior to the launch. They had already had multiple cancellations of the launch, and 32 people gathered, including engineers from Thiokol, leadership from Thiokol, including the vice president of operations of Thiokol, the manufacturer of the solid rocket booster, and then much of the leadership of NASA, who was going to actually have the authority, they had the authority to actually cancel. And to give you insight as to the condition of the team at that time, we have an unbelievable amount of evidence based off of the commission report that we can look into that give us sort of a snapshot and a glimpse into what their conditions of their mind and of their health, and we see this in their sleep. This year this here is just a graph of 24 hours with that black vertical band right there in the middle is the teleconference. That was that window of the conference. And you can see that the night prior, there was already as little as 2 hours of sleep, and this probably is a lot like how our sleep has been for the last 3 days. And you can see how much sleep was had after the meeting. Overtime, as far as the amount of work, sequential work, engineers working 12, 14 to 18, up to 21 days in a row, with days extending up beyond 8 hours to 12, all the way up to 16 hours. And this leadership team all together in this room, they are tired. And as they have discussions, Thiokol says, it's too cold. We have to scrub the launch. The conditions are unfortunately simply too cold, and we have evidence that shows that if it's below 53 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 15 degrees centigrade, we simply cannot guarantee the performance of these O-rings. And so, all of a sudden, NASA says, well, when the hell do you want me to launch? In April? In 4 months? And suddenly, now faced with this counter and this pressure from NASA, Thiokol requests for a timeout. They say, we just need 5 minutes. We have to kind of gather the evidence. Let us take a look, and we'll come back to the conference. Give us a minute. And it's called the Thiokol Caucus. It was supposed to last 5 minutes. It ended up taking 30 minutes. And this is where we get a glimpse into a group. This is the layout of the room in Utah with all of the members of the team of Thiokol. These are the people who manufacture, who are the subject matter experts for specifically the O-rings and the solid rocket booster and the performance. There's sort of a combination of staff, including people who are involved in specifically the actual barrels and the cases and the joints, how they are brought together, and then task force heads for the gas dynamics and for the seals themselves. And then there are 2 engineers who are highlighted in green who say, we cannot take off tomorrow. Boisjoli, the one at the bottom, was a structural design engineer having 6 years of experience and who specifically was the expert in these seals. He says, we cannot launch tomorrow. It's worth looking at the layout of the room. M is managers. And if you look at where they are in the room relative to other people, they're all on one side of the table. And I don't know if you have ever gone to a leadership meeting at your institutions, but this might seem a little familiar. And you have management on one side, and you have this sort of spattering of engineers, and those who are the most vocal are closest to the managers, willing to be in proximity, being confident with their position, and then this sort of gradient of certainty that kind of fades away as you go further down the room. And this probably sounds somewhat familiar to you. And the 2 engineers say, we cannot launch. It's going to be 36 degrees tomorrow. They might be 18 degrees, he says. Minus 12 degrees centigrade on the pad. We have never seen this before. We have never launched the shuttle. These SRMs have never performed at this temperature. We're not sure what's going to happen. And Boisjoli says, I don't want to be the person to sign for it. Jerry Mason, who is the general manager and senior VP of Thiokol, the entire corporation, says, am I the only one who wants to fly here? As he gets all these comments from the engineers. And being unable to sort of build consensus, they end up making a decision to override and push the engineers out of this decision-making and say, we as the managers will take on the load as far as making this decision here, and we will vote on it. There's internal friction. Bob Lund has concerns. Bob Lund is at the bottom there, and he says, I'll be honest, I don't know if we can do this. And one of them says, you need to put your management hat on. That's what you have to do. And he says, well, then I can't sign for it. And the VP of the Space Booster Program, Joe Kilminster, says, you won't have to, because I will sign. And at the request of NASA, when they reconvened after 30 minutes, NASA said, Thiokol said, we will launch, we can launch tomorrow. And the NASA group said, excellent. All right, so we've built consensus now. We've all kind of gathered our opinions here. We have consensus. NASA says, I just need you to put it into paper. I need you to sign a document that says that you think that the conditions are acceptable. And the VP of Morton Thiokol, Kilminster, there decides to sign. And he signs a document that says that Morton Thiokol Incorporated recommends that this launch 51L, it was just the number, proceeds tomorrow, and it will not be significantly different from prior flights, including those that are colder. There's a fair amount of burden and blame that's put on Bob Lund because he is a VP of engineering. He is one of the vice presidents. He's very senior in the organization. And when interviewed during the commission, he ends up admitting something that kind of rings and sort of brings on an important lesson. He says, that there was a shift where we now had to prove that instead of going from the approach of prove to me that it is safe, instead we were being put into this position of prove that it is unsafe to fly. And that transition is something that he identified and said it just felt different. But not only that, he talks about just how it felt as sort of this collective group. And he says, well, that's the kind of the mode that we got ourselves into that evening. And it seems like we have always been in the opposite mode, but and honestly, I should have detected that, and I did not, and the role kind of switched. And it was that switch to building towards consensus in that room. And Bob Lund ends up getting exposed to a fair amount of blame. And that's because this is a reflex and a response that we naturally have when things go wrong, is that we always sort of assume that it's the bad apple, and it's the story of the bad apple ruins the whole batch. And so really, when you're looking at quality and performance as a team, what you have to do is you just simply have to find the bad apples and take the bad apples out. Sidney Decker, who writes a fantastic book that is free and available online about medical error, a field guide as he calls it, says that faced with a bad, surprising event, we change the event or we change the players in it. And that's how we respond to these events. We're blaming Bob Lund and trying to place the blame on a single individual. And we do this rather than I try to identify and figure out sort of the basics about what the system, how the system made this event possible. We focus on the bad apple in the individual, and we don't think about how the system created that individual. We don't think about how the group did. And this kind of ties into this whole idea about how we think about process as well. We think about people, bad apples, take them out, and we look at processes. If you have a process that breaks down, you have an undesirable event occur, we say, well, the process is bad then, right? We take the process out. We either fix it, we blow it up. But the problem is this, is that in your organization, you can have a bad process that actually has a good outcome all the time. And you can have a good process, by the way, that can have a bad outcome. I'm sure that that's something that you've experienced at your place. And we have to be very careful about sort of oversimplification, because this is sort of the current state of quality improvement and trying to prevent major incidents, is that then we start thinking about simple ways to fix things. And it's very appealing. We make checklists, we make, be mindful, and then we laminate the hell out of things, a lot of bullet points, and all of these placards that are put in, because we're trying to find simple fixes. But the problem is that simple fixes can only fix simple problems. And the reality about this whole event of Challenger, it was not the O-rings that killed. It wasn't. And everybody walks away from Challenger thinking that it was the O-rings. It wasn't the O-rings. It was what happened in this room. It was the dynamic. It was the momentum and the inertia in that room that is actually what killed those 7 astronauts tragically. The O-rings were just the medium for it. And so all of this focus is on the simple fix. Oh, well, it's the O-rings. And NASA did that. They focused on the simple fixes. But really, at the end of the day, there's a fundamental issue with how teams come to decisions and how there are pressures and how there's momentum that builds amongst teams when they sit together. And there's a great interview that Malloy, who is one of the leads on the NASA side, Malloy, who was identified as one of the problems, is believing the system more than the people inputting into that system. And that it's actually the dynamic amongst the group that created this event. It was a group who had become insensitive to risk. Kevin Fung does a fantastic talk about normalization of deviance in the context of NASA events that I highly recommend you watch. And what it was talking about is that it's about a slow march towards high risk. It's taking a shortcut, taking on some risk, getting away with it and saying, okay, it seemed to work out all right. And then constantly taking that small little step. And then before you know it, you turn around and you realize just how far you've come from what you were before, as far as your willingness to tolerate risk. It was also an overconfidence in quantitative data. NASA said, prove it. Show me the data that says that this is unsafe. And the problem was that the engineers didn't have a way to say, oh yeah, at 36, we actually performed tests, and at 36 Fahrenheit, you're gonna have blow by. They didn't have that. They had it down to 53. And so NASA said, well, we want numbers. And they really relied on this quantitative data as a means to be able to make decisions. And if you don't show up at your meeting at your institution without graphs and hard facts, numbers that they can see, oftentimes tied to a dollar sign, that shows why what we are doing is unsafe or not correct, unless you have that, and you simply say, well, I've talked to people, that oftentimes isn't enough to overcome this sort of group dynamic. There's also power culture problems as far as there's asymmetry of power amongst the organization. And finally, there's tolerance of Malloy for a while. Frankly, Malloy, in that moment when he was trying to build consensus in the room and get this rocket sent up into the orbit, was a situation where not a one-off. He had actually changed documents and submittals specifically involving O-ring blow-by 3 times. And I tell you this, and again, I can see faces of disgust and disdain who blame Malloy for it, when you have to understand that it is the group. It was the fact that as a group, all 32 people were in this position of trying to come up to consensus. It is not a single individual. Groupthink is this sort of inherent desire and draw towards conformity, towards conforming to the ideas and opinion of the sort of critical mass that's in that room. It is a reflex. It's a response. You will have it. It is a cognitive predisposition. Thank you, Ross. It's something inherently, when you are in a group, you socially get drawn towards conformity and consensus. And the problem is that it can undermine your actual rational decision making, or otherwise the knowledge that you have in your mind as a subject matter expert, specifically when in that room. And this can happen during resus. It can happen in an operating room. It can happen in the helicopter when you're making decisions about whether or not to proceed with a mission. It might be that sort of, hey guys, the weather is, and it's a sort of decision making about, well, all right, the pilot seems to be okay with the flight. I don't want to seem like I'm being the problem here. And looking over towards your partner, you start to say, like, how do you feel about it? Well, and it's sort of this this desire towards pleasing the team of art. Well, I guess we'll just continue with the mission because he seems to want it and the pilot seems to. I guess I'll go. But I have concerns, but the rest of the group seems to be okay. And so this draw towards conformity ends up being the problem. And so how do we identify, how can you scan for it in your institution, in your team, in the moment when you are subject to this pressure and subject to groupthink, is things first outside of that singular decision you're making. It's sometimes the subtle things of the language that you use when you are speaking as a team, historically, what the culture amongst the group is. Are you amongst a team where you all speak about you being in and others being out? In the same way that NASA teams focused on themselves and their organization and thought of the engineers as out. Is it anesthesia versus surgery, or ER versus cardiology, or otherwise doctor versus paramedic, paramedic versus doctor, whatever it is there some sort of sense of there's us and them, and potentially otherwise of hierarchy? And if you're participating and if your team has that culture, you're at risk for this pressure and this inertia towards conformity and consensus, despite the fact that there's potentially evidence that something is wrong. Scan for modifying language. In family versus out of family is a term used in the engineering world and was specifically used following or prior to the Columbia disaster, which broke up on reentry in the early 2000s. What does in family versus out of family even mean? What it meant was, did that briefcase-sized piece of foam that broke off the fuel tank make a hole in the wing out of family, or is there not a hole in the wing in family? Was this an event that did not result in something outside of sort of normal? This is modifying language to help sort of take away the gravity and the actual reality of the decision, the question being asked here. It's an engineering term, and people will adopt terms and other language specifically to be able to potentially avoid actually being frank and open and direct about what the actual question is. They were asking, do we have a hole in the space shuttle wing, or yes or no? And they were using modifying language. So if you're amongst a team and you start to see that the language is changing, you need to be very aware of that. Is this an organizational structure where there is hierarchy placed over expertise? Are there rigid structures through which you can submit feedback? Do you have to follow through a singular person to feed things up the chain? Do you have a certain set path? Is it a software that you have to log into to submit a safety concern regarding something happening in your operating room? And is there some sort of unwillingness to consider the value of expertise? Is there otherwise an intolerance for creativity? Do you amongst the group identify and say, oh, well, they're the problem people? Oh, well, anesthesia is just always the problem people. Is there some sort of black sheep? Ask yourself, where are you in that herd? Because you are potentially, it's resulting in unsafe behaviors. Or otherwise, do you have a sense of invulnerability? NASA management was surveyed as to what they estimated. This is senior leadership of NASA. They were asked to estimate what they thought the risk of a loss of a vehicle was, of a shuttle blowing up or otherwise breaking up on reentry. And when they were surveyed, they said, I estimate the risk to be 1 in 100,000. That means that you could do a flight a day for 300 years and nothing would happen. And when you spoke to the engineers, on average, it was 1 in 100. And for some, they said, it's only a matter of time. Titanic was named the unsinkable ship. It's part of that sort of sense of invulnerability that resulted in their selection of their steel and the distances between rivets that made it that this ship had a devastating hull rupture. That's what drove some of that decision making. And so we have to think about, how should I build my team? If I can figure out factors that maybe make us at risk for groupthink, what can I do to build my team? And that's encourage diversity of opinion. Shift away from having people from a single subject matter. Don't just have all anesthesiologists or all surgeons or all cardiologists or all doctors or nurses or paramedics in a single group. You have to have diversity, and that's in every way. It is as far as age, tenure, not just having consultants, but also having students there who can potentially be in that team, in that group, to be able to provide a differing opinion, a differing or otherwise different viewpoint. Have a deference to expertise. There are simply some people who amongst the team, despite the fact that you're very senior and you're unbelievably intelligent, much like all of that NASA team was. Malloy is very intelligent. Mason was very intelligent. Make sure that there's a process through which you have deference towards those who are in the room who maybe are more junior. Remember, Mason was 6 years. He was only an engineer for 6 years. He was the subject matter expert. Boisjoli, excuse me. Boisjoli had 6 years. He could have, and he was the one who said, we cannot launch tomorrow. You also need to figure out and put some sort of backstop to when the process can be stopped. There has to be stop work authority. This here is the Toyota manufacturing plant. There is a long rope that if any person identifies something that potentially would put the product at risk, a team member at risk, they can pull it and stop the entire production line, and it runs the entire length from the start to the end of the manufacturing line. Anyone can grab it and pull on it. And you'll have to figure out what that is in your organization, in your institution, and amongst that group. And in this reality is, there was no set hard point for a temperature that had been decided upon between NASA and vehicle as far as if it is below X, we cannot go, which is what actually provided this sort of space to be able to take those drifts away from safe and working towards unsafe. You also have to think about how you design your processes. You have to design things in a manner where your staff are thinking actively about the work. It cannot simply be, we come up with the rules and decisions and processes and then simply they follow it. And don't shy away from having oversimplified processes. This here is an intersection in Drachten in the Netherlands. It was an intersection that saw 22,000 cars that would come through, and they had over a span of 3 years, 44 fatalities. And so they added more signs, more lights, more blinking, more stop signs. Go now, don't go now. Red lights for the cars, green lights. Bike lanes, they put little blinking lights, stripes, chevrons, bollards. The next 2 years, same exact number of people were killed, despite putting all these controls. And an engineer, Hans Monnerbren, said, you have people totally giving up to the process. And so if the light says, okay, well, now I can walk, or when the bicyclist gets the green light and they go through, they're not looking and engaged in the process to see whether or not it is actually safe to go through. And that's why you have 44 people getting killed in 3 years. And so his approach was to actually remove every form of control. And this has carried over into the approach and how the Netherlands identify and mitigate risk for intersections that are dangerous for pedestrians, bicyclists, and cars. And they have increasingly shifted towards cutting down on the number of signs, counter to how it is over in the United States, where everything is signed up, lit up, and striped. And that is finally the measure that actually stopped people from getting killed at this intersection, is building a process through which people are re-engaged in ensuring the safety of the outcome. And the problem in the rooms, both at Thiokol and NASA, is that everybody had kind of given up to the process. And where were all those other engineers in that room further down the table who all also thought on interview that it was unsafe to launch? It's because they had given up their sense of that I am now still an important part of the process and of safety. And I guess I'll just defer to letting this kind of carry out. The process will make them safe, not my opinion, not my input. This actually almost happened with the commission report. Richard Feynman, who was part of the Manhattan Project, who had somewhat of a reputation, if I'll be honest, in the Manhattan Project, because he was known for shouting down lousy ideas, as it was described, was asked specifically to participate and be one of the subject matter experts for determining the causes of this event, of the Challenger disaster. So the commission used mostly, as ordered by the president, Ronald Reagan, Congress put together a group of people, mostly from the military, Air Force, and him, who's a physicist. And he saw that as the team was coming together, he saw the exact same phenomenon that played out both at Baikal and NASA, which is that these were all military people wearing lots of pieces of flair, fancy name tags, and they all used the same language, and they all were extremely senior. And he saw the writing on the wall, and he said, this is a waste of time. Ronald Reagan had actually asked the commission to give some leniency to NASA because he worried that NASA would get crushed by the public if too much blame was placed on them. And so actually Richard Feynman refused at first to join the commission. He said, this is a waste of my time. Everybody here already has made their mind up, and they all have the same opinion because they're all the same person, just copy-pasted with slightly different pieces of flair. And so he saw this, and you see in the problem of groupthink in the commission investigation following the Challenger disaster. After some insistence of his wife, who I think everyone's very thankful for, he did join. And he, in a moment, as a sort of disruptor, coming in as an expert from his background, found a way to be able to, during the first few days, having all of this sort of circular discussions, everybody seemed to be in the same place, say how unfortunate it is, but you know, there were multiple factors, and spaceflight is dangerous indeed. He, in front of live television, having gone to the hardware store and grabbed a vise, gone to the launch pad and found a portion of the material and of an O-ring that was used, of the same identical type as what was on the satellite rocket booster, and having asked for an assistant to get him some ice water, he submerged the O-ring in ice water as the proceedings of the commission were going on, and without telling anyone, all of a sudden...
Well, I took this stuff that I got out of your seal, and I put it in ice water. And I discovered that when you put some pressure on it for a while and then undo it, it maintains, it doesn't stretch back, it stays the same dimension. In other words, for a few seconds at least, and more seconds than that, there's no resilience in this particular material when it's at a temperature of 32 degrees. I believe that has some significance for our problem.
Completely unannounced, completely unplanned. As everybody was saying, it's really unfortunate, but you know, there are risks, and what we do in medicine or space does come with a certain acceptable risk, and it's unfortunate, and obviously the nation mourns. He, in front of live television, drops this right into the middle of the room. And that's how you break up groupthink. It's first him being invited, which we have to respect people for actually suggesting that he does, but also him accepting, taking it on, and then being willing to have that sort of difficult, disrupting moment that can potentially be the thing to get people off of that sort of mentality of consensus and of uniformity. And he actually writes an appendix, and it's probably the most important part of this commission report, which is available for free, and it's hundreds of pages, and it's actually a tragic but amazing document, a narrative of a mistake. His appendix is probably the most important. In it, he has a final sort of closing word, which is that reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. Thank you.
Thank you, Vahe. That was amazing. Again, love your talks. I think it's fantastic. Any questions from the audience? I have one question that's been texted to me, which I will ask. So, in terms of defending against sort of groupthink? You've given some strategies and stuff there. Have you come across the concept of using red teams or as the ATAC guys, positive disruptors, to come and test your defenses to see if you can actually resist that?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. I will say that one of the first things is that your patient in healthcare is somewhat of the red team. But by having one of the recommendations when looking at how to structure these types of groups, these committees, what have you, in whatever organization, is that one, there actually has to be at times the leadership must not be present. And by changing the power structure within that group intermittently, by having the most senior leadership who are the chairs of these committees, have them actually not be present for a series of meetings, to be able to allow potentially now for more of this space for more creative discussion and also less deference towards hierarchy. And certainly you can have active efforts where you can substitute people. So you can, one, take leadership out for a couple of meetings and see how the discussion starts to shift. You can also certainly try to inject new people on a transient basis, potentially, who are from a different subspecialty, from something completely different, potentially not healthcare, or otherwise, even from as far as a med student can come in here and identify and find potentially gaps that you have not considered. The reality is that groupthink is not just about consensus. It is inertia. It is like a very large, heavy train barreling down the tracks. It is so difficult because it generates its own energy and it becomes so difficult to actually start to shift away, which is why by taking leadership out, you decrease that sort of mass and momentum, you shift the culture a little bit, and actually start by having potentially substitutions with more junior people certainly can start to kind of become a more creative thought process. Frankly, I build clinical systems. Some of the biggest lessons on the transfusion side, on our transfusion program, have come from people who are on training during their first 4 months. And they ask a question, and all of a sudden I say, I've been doing this for 5 years, this thing, I've transfused hundreds of units, and I have never actually seen that hole and that gap in my systems. So I certainly think we have to respect that sort of creativity of the new and the young, or otherwise of someone who comes from a different clinical environment.
Thank you. Any questions?
Do you have specific things that you do in your practice that can help break these walls down?
I think it's I think I am a work in progress in my practice, and what I'm still imperfect, frankly. What I have thought a lot about is reflecting on. I have now been in HEMS for 10 years. I've been doing this now for about 15 to 20 years in total. I think a lot about, and I've reflected on who I was when I was younger, and thought about sort of the experiences that I had when I was young, to try to make sure that I understand that I've not become the VP of management or of engineering, and I have not, and that's one of the big struggles. And so I think what it requires is, first, be reflective on your own practice. Much of what Ross actually talked about, I think, is some of that sort of fundamental thing about thinking about where you are, where your cognition is now, and relative to when you were younger. And frankly, I think the more junior you are, sometimes you are thinking about problems so outside of the normal, out of the norm, that certainly potentially by thinking back on your past practices can certainly be helpful. But I'll tell you, I have not found the perfect fix, and I'm working on it myself, frankly.
Cool. Thank you very, very much. That was amazing. So our own red team speaker has delayed us slightly. So if we truncate the break slightly and say come back at 10:35, take just over 15 minutes, and we will carry on with extremes. Hi, guys. We're going to restart again shortly. So if you'd like to take your seats. Shouldn't it be unpersoned now? You can't say unmanned, can it? Uncrewed. Uncrewed, yes. Special technology. It's shifting out. Right, guys, can I ask you to take your seats and we shall restart? So, first of all, just a couple of notices and things for you guys. So for those of you that haven't already got your CPD and CME certificates, they are just by the door as you go out. So please do pick those up today before you leave the sessions. And if your name isn't on one of those certificates, just email the conference team and we will get you a CME certificate sent out to you. But please don't forget to pick up the CME certificates. So now we're going to move on to the last of the lectures for TBS24, and we're going to be talking about extremes. And after that, we're going to go down to Air Zermatt for some talks and some demonstrations of the capabilities of Air Zermatt and mountain rescue. We're going to have a great talk from the former CEO of Air Zermatt in a little bit. But in terms of the logistics for going down to Air Zermatt, it's going to be meeting at 12:45 just outside the conference center here. And when you go down to Air Zermatt, can we please ask that you take your lanyards off, put those away, and no caps, just because it is an operational aircraft area, and for safety reasons, we ask that, because something to do with the O-rings, but Vahe said he'd figure it out. Okay, so no caps, no lanyards, no loose stuff. I mean, I tie all my hair back for this. Right, so moving on to the speakers now. Our first speaker is again another returning speaker, and it's a pleasure to have you back, Will. But Will Smith, who many of you will already know, who is a titan of pre-hospital care, who has done so much. So he's an EMS and emergency medicine physician in Jackson Hole in Wyoming. Now, I think that's the big one somewhere in America. It's not very good with my geography. He's also an associate professor at the University of Washington School of Medicine, and he's the co-medical director of the Grand Teton National Park, and also the co-medical director of the Teton County Search and Rescue. And as if that wasn't enough, he's also a colonel in the US Army. Now, we've talked a lot about the sort of things that we can do and some of the tech that is being employed for directly to our patient care and some of the things that we can do to help that. But what we're going to be talking about in the extremes and what Will's going to tell us about is the use of drones to assist us in search and rescue.
Great. Thanks, John. And thanks to the conference organizers for inviting me to speak back again this year. So yeah, going to change up topics a little bit. Going to talk about using drones or unmanned aerial systems in search and rescue. And there's a lot of application with drones across virtually every field response we find ourselves in. And so just from the audience, how many people are using drones in their rescue or practice? got a couple shy hands kind of poking up in the air there. So yeah, it's definitely a new and emerging technology. Kind of it started with more of the recreational drones. I've got my son Zach here with me again this year, and he's the one that got me into it with basically the little drones that were flying around the house, and now we're just working our way up. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we can use those in search and rescue. So this is my home, so Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So it's one of those little squares kind of in the middle of the United States in the Rocky Mountains. And so Jackson Hole, we got the pointy thing up in the air called the Grand Teton for us. So a little bit kind of similar shape to the Matterhorn that we've got behind us today. But work with Teton County Search and Rescue and have a lot of other hats. As I think a lot of us in the room, we basically kind of are a little ADHD and like to do a lot of different things. So my real job has been a emergency medicine physician in St. John's Hospital in Jackson, Wyoming for about the past 20 years. And that's really what pays the bills. That's what gets me to go out and do all sorts of other fun things out there. The logo's on the right side of the screen. Like was mentioned, I'm co-medical director with my partner, Dr. AJ Wheeler, for really all the response agencies in our valley. And so that's Teton County Search and Rescue, which we'll talk a little bit more specifically about today, but also Jackson Hole Fire EMS, which is our paid and volunteer all hazard fire EMS response. So we have 2 ambulances staffed 24/7 with multiple other volunteer stations, as well as Grand Teton National Park and Bridger Teton National Forest. As mentioned, lots of other hats, Colonel in the Army Reserve, do some SME or subject matter expert work for DARPA, so the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. So really looking at that big forward leap of technology, so that 10+ leap. So kind of looking at things like the internet, the stealth bomber really came after Sputnik back in the 50s is when they developed. So really looking at a lot of these new technologies and how they can cross between all these different silos. And that's what I've really kind of found my career taking me towards, is really being able to cross-pollinate between all these different silos. Even in the military, one military branch really doesn't know what the other one's doing, to what the Park Service is doing, to search and rescue teams. So taking information, technology, medical practices, and help bridging those across is really what I'm able to do. And then do a lot of other consulting, teaching, medical direction for different organizations that are up there. So no real official conflicts or financial disclosures. I'm talking about some specific products, but it's really just what I've been able to see and find. But this is our Teton County Search and Rescue helicopter. So Airbus H125, we got this last year. Our foundation helped us raise enough money. They were able to purchase this helicopter, now have sustained kind of year-round operations. And so do have some funding support from Teton County Search and Rescue. So thank you to all the folks back home to come here and speak with you today. And also the chair of the ICAR International Drone Working Group. And so really looking at, again, applying best practices between multiple areas out there. And actually, I'd like to invite you all in October of 2025. So next year, we're actually hosting ICAR in Jackson, Wyoming. So if you're a ICAR attendee, which is the International Commission on Alpine Rescue, really do a lot of search and rescue, talking between avalanche to terrestrial, big medical working group as well as some other kind of dog and different disciplines. But if you're interested, we'd love to have you over. So this is our search and rescue hangar. We've got a helipad. Our team just had our 30th anniversary, so we were formed in 1993. It's a team of about 30 to 40 volunteers. We've got 1 paid administrator, and we're fall under the sheriff's office, which most of the search and rescue teams in the United States do. It's the kind of legal responsibility of the sheriff of the county or the jurisdiction to really provide the search and rescue for that area. And so that's what we fall under. We have about 75 to 100 missions annually. I've got a QR code that takes you to our search and rescue webpage, and they do really nice summary reports of kind of the rescues in about 6-month increments. So if you really want to see what our team does, it definitely gives you a lot more information there. So our team is really a full scope search and rescue team. So we do everything from avalanche to swift water to cave and basically everything in between. So we have a lot of different realms. We do a lot of helicopter operations with short haul. And so drones is one of the things that we're starting to introduce, and I'm the kind of lead for our search and rescue team on that. So unmanned aerial systems is really the technical or formal name for drones. And so just like we've talked about before, there's always that risk to benefit. And so that's everything we do in search and rescue. That's everything we do in medicine. That's everything we do in life. So it's really balancing those things out and trying to figure out when and how you should use drones in your search and rescue team, as well as potentially other jurisdictions or kind of missions. So the terminology, so unmanned aerial systems, or UAV is kind of the term. The unmanned aerial vehicle is really the platform that flies, but it's really the whole system together. So that's why unmanned aerial system is really the formal term. Start talking about different types of drones. So you have fixed wing drones that are more like airplanes that fly around. There's rotor or VTOL, so VTOL, so vertical takeoff and landing. And in a lot of search and rescue situations, we don't have a landing strip or a one-way. So some of the bigger drones actually need quite a bit of space to take off. But the VTOLs, or the quadcopters, or kind of multiple rotor winged aircraft, have the ability to take off and land right where you need to do the mission or the operation. So again, you've got all the same kind of different size, weight, range, altitude, battery life, all those different things that you're looking at when you're trying to choose a platform to use for your drone program. Then you've got a ground-based controller. So the smaller ones like the DJI Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual that we use, you actually just basically pull your cell phone out, put that into the ground control station, and they plug together. So it already optimizes a lot of that technology that's in the iPhone in your pocket or kind of what other kind of cellular device. And then as you get bigger drone products out there, then they're more separate ground control stations. So you have a pilot in command, and so that's really the person that's making the go, no-go decision on launching. You're still working within the organizational response structure, so you still have an incident commander, you still have other people that you report to, but it really, just like in an aircraft, the pilot in charge has the ultimate responsibility of those operations. You have visual observers sometimes, so if you have somebody kind of far forward from where you're launching from to help with some of the drone operations, kind of avoiding the collisions, looking out for other crewed aircraft, so making sure you don't have any airspace conflicts is important. And then you may have a person operating control. So the pilot in command may not be the person actually flying the aircraft. And so once you get a lot of these things, again, crew resource management is very important to kind of know who reports to who's doing the communication, and just so make sure you've got a seamless operation that's safe. So unmanned, or sometimes as a terminology is changing, uncrewed vehicles. So we've got aerial vehicles, and we've got ground vehicles, and we've got underwater vehicles. And again, sometimes in some search and rescue operations, especially as this technology is maturing, as we're figuring out how best to apply it and use it, you may actually use multiple platforms at the same time. So there's some products that are thinking about being able to have a ground-based robot that comes out, and then you can launch air-based kind of drone based off of that. So again, a lot of different technology that's emerging out there in the field. So again, lots of different drone platforms out there. So first recorded drone platform, if you start digging deep into the history, was in 1849 when the Austrian armed forces launched some balloons filled with explosives towards Venice. And so again, that's the background and the development of drones, and it's basically gone up from there. So again, we've definitely seen a lot of military kind of large scale drones in the news, big long reaches, sometimes 24-hour flight times, and again, very large, very expensive, very complicated. But as we start looking down to what we can use for drones in search and rescue, we start seeing that we can deliver AEDs, like in the bottom center. Or in Australia, they've got programs where lifeguards are able to deploy kind of life preservers to people out in the surf with a drone much quicker than they can get out to help the person. In Africa, there's a blood delivery program. So you basically have a center hub with some limited resources, sometimes antivenom and other things like that can be used and deployed to far reaches with drones. Industrial, so drones searching and detecting pipeline leaks, looking at power lines, looking at different problems like that. And using in agriculture, pretty zone Amazon, and basically all these other delivery packages will be just dropped off at your doorstep by a drone. So again, all these things are coming, and in search and rescue, we're definitely seeing some of these as well. So looking at the hazards from drones, and again, if we've been following the news, lots of this has been going on. So Ukraine, basically a lot of the other conflict zones. Drones are a new thing that is definitely a concern. So thinking about the hazards, kind of then the drone defeating technology. So how do you protect against drones? And so again, all these things are balancing those. But in search and rescue, we're really looking to try and use it to help save somebody. So not quite as concerned about this, but again, just once you start looking at and realizing all this technology is out there, it can be used for harm or bad things as well. So as you start working with drones, you start working on bigger operations, you just need to make sure that you're deconflicting the airspace. So if you have crewed helicopters or crewed fixed wing or other aircraft flying in the area, make sure you're deconflicting that. There's a If You Fly, We Can't is a big public service program that's coming out from the U.S. Forest Service and other wildland firefighters, because again, a lot of the recreational drones, you kind of have it in your pocket and you can start flying anywhere. But if you have like real missions that are going on, it can be an important thing to make sure to deconflict. So really having that kind of local regional command and control, so knowing who's flying, who's an official capability, and more technology and more registration is coming out to try and help with that. So an example of this was a couple years ago, we were using a drone. Wasn't a search and rescue, it was actually a working structure fire. So one of the large hotels in Jackson was burning. And so we used the drone during the night to help with seeing where the heat sources of the fire were, being able to see kind of where the water was being directed towards the heat. And on my ground controller, and you can see this is a snapshot, air ambulance, a HIMSS ship, basically was flying into our helicopter or a heliport at the hospital to pick up a patient. But again, they were just kind of looking to see what's going on. And up to this point, there's really not accurate real-time communication. But from the drones, you can basically see if the aircraft has a transponder. You can actually kind of see with the drone controller, it can give you alerts that there's an aircraft in the area. But that's only if all the technology is working correct. So you really have to be careful with deconflicting the airspace. So you think drones are cool? Think you need to get one for your program? So how do you go about doing that? And so really looking at what the certifying and regulations are in the area. There's a lot of limitations basically where drones are manufactured. So DJI, the product that we're using, is actually manufactured in China, just because of some of the problems with government and critical infrastructure. The federal government and military do not allow DJI products to be flown in their airspace, but it's a commercial off-the-shelf product that's really matured much faster than many of the other drone programs. So again, there's limitations by what agency you may be working for as far as what drone product you might be able to buy and purchase and use. So you've looked at all your regulations, you've gone through all the paperwork, then you have to start training and equipping your crew and your program. Kind of what is the right UAV platform do you have? What do you have the budget for? Then looking at what concepts, how are you going to use drones in what SAR operations, kind of how do you kind of put that with your concept and plan, and then get all that in place, then you got to get a call out. So what specific mission will the drone be the best used for? So like many things we've talked about, partnerships are important. So our drone program is a combined between Teton County Search and Rescue and the Sheriff's Office, as well as Jackson Hole Fire EMS. So we use pooled funds together. We've pooled training, drone pilots. And so we've got a group that when there is a mission that we can activate potentially other drone pilots. So this was a crash on Teton Pass. And so this truck and trailer with a bunch of logs was coming down the road. The brakes went out and basically went through kind of these cable retention systems. It didn't quite work like it was supposed to because it was supposed to stop the truck before it got this far. And you can basically see some of the logs that went down the hill. So again, using a drone to get good situational awareness, being able to kind of see potentially if a patient was ejected down the hill. And so again, this is one of the operations that we've had for our program. So again, who does the certifying and the regulations? In the US, it's the FAA. Over here in Europe, EASA. And so there's definitely whatever geopolitical jurisdiction you're in is going to be important to make sure you're following those rules. For the US, it's a Part 107, a remote pilot certificate with small unmanned aerial system. And so what's a small UAS? And so again, you start looking at the different types of drones out there. But small US is basically from 0.25 kilograms to 25 kilograms. And again, there's much larger drones out there. Again, lots of different rules. There's micro drones. There's basically age restrictions, all these different things. As you start getting into these programs and setting them up, I just need to be aware of. So for public safety or government, so search and rescue, fire departments, law enforcement, all those different things, there's some slightly different steps. You can get some waivers based on some of the limitations that just a recreational drone or a real estate drone pilot might do. And so just making sure that you're understanding what those are. So this is one of the smaller products that we have. So this is the DJI Mavic Enterprise Dual. So got this probably about 4 years ago. At that time, it was about $3,000. kind of in the top right there, that's the Mavic 3T. So that's the newer equivalent. So just like technology, it's expanding. And so every couple of years, if you're going to be having kind of an ongoing program, you're going to need to kind of be upgrading your equipment if you're staying with the times. So this has about 30-minute flight time. It's got IR as well as visual optics. This is the case that it comes packed in. It actually has a speaker that you can plug into the top of it, so you can fly over, and if you have somebody kind of in a swift water setting or on an avalanche cliff or something like that, you can basically give them one-way communication. So you can tell them, stay where you are, we're going to come get you, wave your arms if you can hear me. Those are some of the things that you could use with that speaker. It's also got some other lights and things for night operations, and I've got a video of that coming up here soon. So this is our larger platform. So this whole box with all the cameras and lenses is about $25,000. Again, the newer program is now the 350 RTK. This has got about a 7-kilometer operating range, 30-minute flight time again, and about 2-kilogram payload capacity. And so again, you need to have some sort of releasing platform or something like that to be able to drop like a life preserver or a radio or food or different things like that to a patient out there. But this is our larger platform. So what are the limitations? So what do you need to think about when you're going to be going out on a drone mission? So battery life. And again, that's one of the things that I wish that the technology had kind of better batteries out there. Again, the cube and the weight, kind of how much the batteries weigh. It takes a lot longer to charge a battery than it does to fly and deplete it. So having ongoing kind of drone operations, you need to think about all these different things. Right now with our Matrice, the larger platform, we've got about 3 flights in the batteries that are in the box, and you need to make sure those are continually charged up. You still have to worry about some of the same aerodynamics that you worry about with crewed aircraft, just like airplanes and helicopters, kind of what flies and makes it go in the air. Again, the rotors, the center of gravity. So if you're carrying a payload, you need to think about that. Worry about those airspace conflicts, and then all the other factors that is deciding which tool is right for the mission. So on the Matrice, you've got interchangeable platforms. So you've got infrared, you've got visual. So this is the zoom camera, the Z30 that we've got on the Matrice. And so this top left is flying 400 feet AGL, above ground level, or 122 meters. And so the camera is looking here down to that vehicle. And so this is the people that are operating it, and you can actually read license plates. So you can really get some amazing standoff imagery. With the GPS and the gimbal, it's really stabilized, so you can actually get some quite good images. So if you really got a focused area of search for a search and rescue operation, you can really use some of these zoom features without even having to get super close. And you start looking at the other things. So the infrared. So these 2 left pictures here, that's that car accident on the Teton Pass. So the top is the visual, and then the bottom is a combined FLIR or infrared option. So you can actually see the engine of the patrol car that's very hot. You can see some of the heat signatures of the people, and you can see the brakes on the back of that trailer that's hanging over the edge where that was heat. And so you could potentially also see with the right thermal signature to be able to see like somebody's body that was potentially ejected. There's other things that using drones for tactical EMS operations. So looking at a building, there's a lot of using fire as a weapon. So somebody lighting a fire in a barricaded a room, or if you have like a meth lab or another chemical explosion, you can use drones for looking internal in structures. And then there's all these other platforms that are coming out there. So looking at LiDAR, so being able to use that to penetrate through certain kind of structures. Looking at hyperspectral, so thinking about sense, thinking about, so avalanche dogs, well, when they go to an avalanche slope and they start smelling kind of this sense that kind of a bird person might be giving off. So some of these newer technologies is thinking about how can we use a drone with one of these new image sensors to be able to see what the dog is smelling, because there's already some of these sensors that can look at methane leaks and different things like that. So the hyperspectral is another way to look at. So lots of case studies and reports out there. So again, just more and more applications on how to use these. Some of the search and rescue concept of operations that we've used is a lost person search. So being able to do like a grid pattern, you can basically program that into a drone to be able to search and be able to use some of the artificial intelligence platforms that are starting to be developed to recognize what is a person laying out there versus a log, different colored clothing, all those things that kind of separate that from what's out there in nature. Some of the infrared capabilities. This is playing hide and go seek with my daughter in the top two pictures. So that's the kind of the top right is her hiding there. You can't see her much kind of on the visual, but you can see the heat signature on the left. So again, kind of some of the things that you can use with looking at drones. So I've got a couple of videos. This is a swift water exercise that we were doing. So this was one of our instructors. He hopped in his inflatable kayak and he's like, okay, save me. And so now you've got to get all your PPE on, your personal protective equipment, your dry suits, your PFD, and then try and go. So we were able to launch the drone and get visual identification of where he's at while we're getting rescued, and then being able to look at the infrared signature as well. So if you're not really seeing him on the visual, you could potentially see him on the infrared. Some of the other situations that we have is vehicles over the edge or vehicles into the river. And so you can use a drone to get up and actually look and see. So this top one was a car that went into the river. You can be able to potentially go in there and see if a patient is in the car, if they're moving, and those sort of situations. This is a wildland fire that we had. And so being able to see where your firefighters are to make sure that they're not in danger, or if the fire is coming too close, you can get them out of there. Again, lots of different operations to be able to see what's going on. So again, making sure that you're deconflicting with all the other kind of crude air resources. So we did have a separate helicopter coming in for this mission, but we had good radio communications who were able to basically kind of know as soon as they got in the area, then we basically land the drone. If we would lose communication, then we'd automatically land the drone. So having some of those pre-planned operational things to work with your partners that are out there. Using it for mass casualty incidents. So this was a 3 hot air balloon crash that we had with 40 plus patients. Being able to get to situational awareness as the initial 911 emergency calls were coming in. We thought there was just one balloon, but as we started getting to the scene, starting getting more situational awareness, it was actually 3 hot air balloons. And so again, using this to understand that situational awareness, kind of figure out where your patients are, really helped with determining the operation and kind of putting the whole scene together. Using it for avalanche. Again, this is one of the things that's out there that we're learning more about. So potentially being able to use drones for avalanche forecasting to see snow loading, using some of the LiDAR platforms, then using it mitigation. Again, weaponizing drones could be the same thing as using it for avalanche mitigation. So dropping bombs on avalanche slopes. Alaska just recently got a special waiver to start exploring this more. Up to this point, the FAA and the EASA basically have been kind of a little frowning on putting weapons on drones up to this point. And then once a patient has been buried, so this is a avalanche that we had. This is the kind of in that drone picture on the top right. That's the probe line that we're looking at during the avalanche. And again, just all the things that every time I fly, basically I'm learning something else. I didn't even think about that. And so being able to apply all these in treatment and evacuation, things to look at as well. So communications, so if you have a remote area, you could basically put a cell phone repeater, or you could put some sort of radio repeater on a drone. And so like with a fixed wing drone or a loiter, those can sometimes be up for a couple hours. So if you have bad radio communications, use that as a repeater system that's portable and going back. Kind of remote operations and night operations. Again, all these different things that you need to think about if you're having different operations. This is scenario that we did a couple months ago for a wilderness advanced life support class that we did. And so again, this is the flying of a small kind of Mavic at night. And so you can see the patient that's over there. And so use the drone to help the search and rescue crews kind of find out where the patient was at. The thermal, interestingly, did not pick up very well. We actually saw better on the visual. And so again, the thermal, you're looking at the delta temperature change with the patient in the environment. So if the patient has got lots of clothing on, or if they're getting hypothermic and close to the environment and the temperature surrounding, the thermal doesn't always work as kind of you would think. And so again, just realizing kind of what the different visual platforms are and how to use them. So for search and rescue, again, it's not the perfect tool, but it is a tool. And so really figuring out kind of how that should fit into your search and rescue response is important. And again, looking at risk and benefit. And again, thanks for the opportunity to come and speak.
Any questions?
I think the way that technology is exponentially changing, I think it's probably years. I mean, there's definitely pockets where drones are really being used and optimized to extreme levels. And so I've just scratched the surface here. But as we get larger technology, kind of better flight time, I think we're probably a few years away to seeing a much more implementation and the standard out there rather than just being these pockets of being investigated. Yeah.
I'm gonna run between.
Really great talk, but have you used drones for possibly finding buried people in avalanche, like attaching a avalanche transceiver or RICO receiver to a drone?
So using the RECO or the avalanche transceiver, right now there's a little bit of signal interference, but one of the biggest things right now that we've been able to do is just looking at surface clues. And so again, being able to look kind of potentially at the last known point and being able to see surface clues down. There's a lot of the superficial burials, and then you can just search that whole thing. But as we are getting to the next steps, those are definitely things to think about. Also thinking about a drone probe line. So using a swarm of drones all lined up in basically a format and a probe to be able to kind of penetrate down to the surface, just like ultrasounds can like penetrate through different technologies. Some of the LiDAR technology, again, those are things that are kind of on that cusp of being implemented.
And are drones being used much outside the US for this sort of stuff? I know some of the services in the UK certainly are using them for law enforcement and stuff, but not so much in EMS.
So the AED delivery is probably kind of the biggest thing I've seen, but like the blood delivery program in Africa, again, there's places that really have big gaps in kind of response and technology. And so, yeah, there's basically little pockets all over that I'm starting to see.
Thank you so much. It's amazing again.
Great. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Matt. No, I'm going to be saying this wrong, aren't I? Komorowski? Yes. So sometimes people take the mickey out of anesthetists and stuff and call us space cadets. You know, say we're just wandering around our own heads doing silly things. But for Matt, it's actually almost true. So he's a consultant in intensive care and anesthesia at Charing Cross, which is my alma mater, where I trained many, many years ago. But he also works for the European Space Agency, and he's a senior lecturer at Imperial College and lectures about not only anesthesia and critical care, but also space medicine. But 2 years ago, he was in the selection process to become one of the European Space Agency's astronauts. And he's going to tell us about that.
Thank you. All right. So indeed, we're going to keep talking about flying objects. I think slightly bigger, slightly faster. And my goal is to tell you what it's like to go through the selection process as a medic. I do need a remote. Thank you. In case you didn't get the title, it's a reference to the words uttered by Gene Kranz, who was the mission director for a lot of the Apollo flights, including the Apollo 13 crippled space flight, who nearly didn't make it back. All right, here's a question for you. Would you go?
T-minus 15 seconds.
Would you sit in that spacecraft?
11, 10, 9, 8. We have a go for main engine start. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1. We have boost ignition and liftoff. Space Shuttle Endeavour with the first American element of the International Space.
Would you sit in that machine?
So
So at takeoff, it's about 2,000 tons. 90% of that is fuel and liquid oxygen. You accelerate from, you see, standstill to 17,500 miles an hour.
Space Center for the 240
25,000 kilometers an hour. And then you reach orbital velocity. At that point, you go 23 times the speed of sound. And with a bullet, if you shoot a 357 Magnum, the speed of that bullet is 1,000 miles an hour.
Never already traveled
70 times faster than a bullet of a 357 Magnum.
3 miles.
Surely, while you're sitting in that spacecraft, you must be thinking about what could go wrong, including, we heard a beautiful talk about the O-ring and the Challenger disaster here, top left corner, 1986. But a lot of other astronauts died either during training or during spaceflight or coming back from spaceflight. So it is a obviously an extremely dangerous endeavor. All right, so I'm asking you again, would you go? Would you actually go? Yeah. So this guy was ready to go. This is a picture of me. I was about 7, I think, at the time. I did not think that one day I would apply to become an astronaut, but I was already sort of, geeky and interested in that, in exploration and doing abnormal things. I did, however, get a normal job. So I trained in Lille. This is in the north of France, a big university hospital, and I trained to become an anesthetist, an anesthesiologist, and an intensivist. Somehow, it didn't quite do it for me, and I wanted to do a little bit more. So I harassed a lot of people, and eventually I landed an internship at the European Astronaut Center in Cologne, in Germany. This was 2009. So went there for a couple of months. This was my first time living abroad and evolving in a multicultural environment, and I very much got the virus for this. Through more harassment, I landed an internship at NASA at the Johnson Space Center, working with Wiley and people at the Human Research Program. This is a picture of me inside the shuttle, the mock-up shuttle that they have at JSC. And this is the time where I met Anil. So Anil is an emergency medicine physician. He's also a US Air Force flight surgeon. And the day I met Anil was a Sunday afternoon somewhere outside of Houston in a swimming pool, as you do in Houston because it's really hot. And Anil was reading a Russian grammar book at the swimming pool on a Sunday afternoon. So I approached him. I was like, "What's going on? Why would you be doing this?" And he said, "Well, it's because I want to be an astronaut. And if you want to be an astronaut, it's good to be able to speak Russian." And really, we became friends. And he opened my eyes to the possibilities. Expanded the horizon of my ambition. Really, he said something that really stuck with me, which was, "I'm not planning on it, but I'm aiming for it." And really, that became sort of my motto as well. I learned Russian myself to the extent I was able to spend 2 months in Siberia, in Yakutsk. I was evolving and I was working in this hospital where no one spoke English, and really, dwelling into the local culture. I gained experience in space analog environments. This is the Mars Society Desert Research Station in Utah. Again, other qualifications and experiences that I thought would be relevant for my application. So I was a doctor with the 24 Heures du Mans, the 24 hours of Le Mans, the endurance car race, for a couple of years. I also got degrees in mountain medicine, diving medicine, hyperbaric medicine, space medicine. I tried to tick all the boxes, right? I joined Toastmasters, the public speaking club. I don't know if you know about that. It's wonderful to improve your confidence speaking in public. And I did a ton of research in space medicine. This is me in a parabolic flight where we did. The study is about intubating in weightlessness, published in the BJA. So at the moment we're flying, so I'm tethered to the floor. This is towards the end of the parabola, and again, all of that was within that project of, getting the best CV I possibly could. Physical training. It was my first time actually coming to Zermatt. I came by foot from Chamonix, so 220 kilometers away. Took me about 6 days by myself. And here you see some data about the progressive increase in the load of my physical training, so the volume of training. And then life went on. Moved to the UK. I became a senior lecturer. I did a PhD in machine learning. Get a day-to-day job, and I waited. So picture my excitement on the 11th of February 2021 when ESA finally announced that they we're looking for a new batch of astronauts. The minimum criteria were indeed very minimal. You had to have a master's degree in a relevant field, and then a number of other very straightforward things. Right, nothing special here. The psychological and intellectual requirements are actually very, very interesting. I apologize for the wordy nature of that slide, but I pasted chunks from the job ad to really give you, tell you exactly what they were looking for. They were looking for someone who works well in a team under stressful conditions to reach challenging group objectives. Does that remind you of anything? Well, how about that? They wanted people to have experience with personal exposure and sound decision-making, risk management capability. How about that for personal exposure? They wanted people with strong analytical reporting skills. Well, that's a little bit about what we do. People with good reasoning capability, good manual dexterity, you know, fine motor skills. Well, I would argue that we need a lot of that in our job. And finally, the personality aspects are very important. You have to work really well as a team. So you need features like gregariousness, empathy, non-aggression, emotional stability. Well, again, I think that's really, really core. So what I see here is the description of pretty much a high-functioning acute care practitioner, right? Some kind of healthcare professional in an acute setting. So I felt okay about applying, and I thought I could really frame my application so as to fit what they were looking for. The selection, 6 rounds, 6 steps in that selection. The first one being CV and personal statement. Second one, psychometric tests. Third one, psychological testing. Fourth round, medical tests. And then 2 rounds of interviews with people of various importance. So this is my personal statements, an extract of it. Obviously, it was two pages long, but this is some of what I wrote, and off I went. I sent my application to the European Space Agency, along with 22,522 other people. Whatever, right? Whatever you don't have control of, you have to accept. In August of 21, I received this wonderful email from ESA saying, congratulations, you have been shortlisted for the second step, the psychological testing. At that point, there was only 1,361 people left. ESA invited every single one of these people to Hamburg, to the center of the German Aerospace Medicine Institution. And for a whole day, you were submitted to tests. I have to thank Tim Peake, the British astronaut, because if you actually read his autobiography in detail, there's a lot of indications about what the tests were going to be. And also there was a lot of chat online among candidates and enthusiasts. So, do you want to try some of these tests? You guys are clever, right? We're gonna start easy. The dials is very easy. You're gonna see 9 dials on the screen. They're missing digits. The digits go from 1 to 8, and obviously the needle points in different direction. And you have to, with a very limited amount of time, you have to see and then remember and write where the needles are pointing towards which digit. Okay, and there's an additional rule. You'll figure this out. So this is to test your perceptual speed. So black color. Look at the black color ones. So the digits are missing, right? Sorry, I shouldn't move. The digits are missing. You see there's a 3, there's an 8, there's a 1, and there's a 2. Do you get that? If you look at the black color. Yes, and then you type. And then round shape. Look at the round ones. That's easy. 7, 7. That's 6. And the one at the bottom is 4. Yeah? Does that work? Also, the digits are always changing position, and they're always missing randomly. But this is the easy one. Black color, 2, 5. You can do it with me, right? That's what, 3, and then 8. You guys get it, right? Good, good, good. Last one. White color, 4, 4, 8, 6. Easy. 8, 6. All right. Much harder for me. This is to test your memory. So if the sound of the volume is okay, we're gonna hear digits. You're gonna hear a random number of digits between 1 and 9. When the voice stops, you have to type them backwards from the end. Backwards. Okay? Let's go.
4, 2, 3, 7, 7, 2, 3.
Yeah. Anyone got that?
7, 9, 5, 3.
I only heard 953, so 359.
4, 6, 6, 6, 3, 5.
Yeah.
5, 2, 6, 7, 2, 7, 8, 8, 5, 3, 2.
Sometimes it's 12 digits. I wanted to do this live, but it was difficult, so I pre-recorded. All right. Last one is one of my favorites. Test your ability to materialize a 3D structure in your head and manipulate it. So picture a 3D cube in your head. One of the faces has a cross on it. One of the faces has a cross on it. And then you can do 4 things to this cube. You can flip it front, back, left or right. Okay? You're going to hear a voice giving you the starting position where the cross is, and then a number of moves. And at the end, you have to say where is the cross facing, which way. Okay, so imagine, let's do a simple one. The cross is at the top, and I flip the cube at the front. Where is the cross now? At the front. And I flip the cube at the front again. Where's the cross? All right, okay, you're smart. All right, let's do it.
Bottom, left, back, right, left, 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 back.
Do you mind pausing here? Do you get that? So it starts at the bottom. So you have the explanations here, because that's just an exercise. But you're at the bottom, you move the cube left, so now the cross is on the right. And so on until the end. Yeah, you can keep that video. Keep playing. This one is fun, all right? I think with the eyes closed, it's not actually hard. Second example coming.
Start. Left, back, left, left, front, right, left, right, front. Start. Front, back, back, front, left, left, left.
That one was easier. It's the right one. All right. Okay, well, there's a website if you want to play with this in your spare time. It's called Pilot Test. So these are tests for plane pilots. I passed this phase of the selection, and then I was invited for the psychological testing. Around the same time, I learned that my friend Anil Menon had finally been selected as a NASA astronaut after trying 4 or 5 times. So I was really thrilled. I'm really thrilled for him. About 400 people were at that stage invited for the psychological testing. This is one day of testing at EAC in Cologne in Germany. Through Anil, I was connected with Aaron Hagan, who has this company of interview coaching for pilots, for commercial pilots, for military pilots. And really, we spent many hours dissecting my statements, my answers to questions. It was very instrumental in performing at the interview that I was submitted to. I passed the psychological testing. I can talk a bit more about what that entailed, but it was actually quite stressful and well designed. 96 people were left at that phase, and these people were invited to the medical tests. Here is a picture of me and the group. So people were split in groups of 8, and for 1 week, a whole week, 5 days, you know, morning to dusk, dusk to dawn to, yeah, one of those. You had to undergo medical tests. So I spent 6 hours on the eyes alone. Every single test under the sun. I didn't even know what I was doing as a doctor. I had 2 cardiac ultrasound. I had a stress test, brain MRI, aortic CT scan, osteodensitometry, sigmoidoscopy, the whole lot. Yeah, I have an anecdote on this, because the German doctor who was doing my colonoscopy was saying, "You're gonna feel pleasure. You're gonna feel pleasure." And I was like, "Are you sure that's the right word?" What? And I was like, "It's not painful, but I wouldn't call it pleasurable." And I said, "Yeah, do you feel the pleasure?" I was like, "Oh, you mean pressure?" Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Accents, huh? Accents. And then, all right. Sorry, then I failed. I failed the medical test. They found a few things they didn't like in my test. One of them being I was diagnosed with an athlete's heart, so borderline LV hypertrophy, very bradycardic at rest. They didn't like that, and I have a 1 centimeter bulla in a lung, and that was the end of the run for me. Oh. Eventually, they invited 45 people to interviews, and they selected 17. This is a short video extract of the big, the big ceremony when they're announced who had been selected. This gentleman is the ESA Director General. So 17 people, 5 career astronauts, 11 reserve, and 1 astronaut with a disability. Sorry, there's no sound, but I'm sure you can picture clapping. All right, 17 people, wonderful. One of the gentlemen I was with during that week of medical tests, Marcus, was extremely lucky because Marcus has been selected as a reserve astronaut, and a few months later was affected to a flight. The flight was paid privately by the Swedish Space Agency and a number of private companies, and in January, the 19th of January of this year, Marcus flew to space. This is 3 weeks ago, aboard a beautiful Falcon 9 rocket off the coast of Florida, and you see here Marcus taking off, going to space. Absolute flawless launch. Look at this beauty. Video of Marcus entering the ISS. And being greeted by the crew. You see, he bumps his head, doesn't know what's happening to his body. He's a rookie, right? I think that's wonderful to see him up there in space and being greeted. All right, well, that wasn't me. So how do you come out on the other side of this experience, right? What does it do to your sense of identity and well, needless to say, there is a grieving cycle. There is a phase where you go through all these steps. You grieve the person you're not going to be, the future you're not going to have, but eventually you think, you reflect, you gain some insight, and you grow, right? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and I think that's very, very true. I'm going to share one insight I got. I spent a week on the meditation retreat in this beautiful Buddhist center in the south of France, near Bordeaux, and I was reflecting about what is my mental model for happiness. How do I maximize happiness and sense of fulfillment in my life? I had this simple mental model where happiness, in my opinion, had to come from meaning and had to come from fun. Meaning means it's attached to work, having a meaningful job, making an impact, making the world a better place. And then meaning also comes with relationship, with your family, with your loved ones, with friends. And then fun is basically sense pleasure, right? The accumulation of sense pleasures. And then I was reflecting on this and pondered about how much of that was causing me attachment, cravings, the fear of losing all the things that I had achieved, always the quest for always wanting more. You know, you have this job, you want a better job, you earn 100K, you want 200K. You can only be happy if everybody around you is healthy, for example. You know, and none of that is very sustainable. Everything is impermanent, right? It's a very Buddhist concept, but I think all of that entails to what you can call conditional happiness. I can only be happy if, and there's a problem there, right? Because all of these things will disappear. You know, we're all gonna die. You cannot achieve everything you want to achieve. I'll never be an astronaut, and it's okay. Next to conditional happiness, there is this thing that you can call unconditional happiness. This idea that happiness is available everywhere, anytime, in the present moment, right? And you don't need to achieve anything to do this. So, for example, I'm extremely happy to be here, to be presenting to you, to tell you my story. You know, be sharing this experience with a group of such wonderful people that are actually making the world a better place. You know, we're not bankers. It's true. It is true. Speak to a banker. They're soulless. I'm gonna finish. Who's this guy? Joko, thank you. Okay. If you don't know who Joko is, I cannot describe him. You have to look him up. Words are not mighty enough to describe Joko. But Joko has a word of wisdom for you and me. Let's hear what he says.
No big philosophical statement, but it makes sense. Burpees are like life. That's right. Burpees are like life. Burpees are hard. Life is hard. But with burpees, all you're actually doing is falling down and getting back up again. Fall down, get back up again. Fall down, get back up again. That's how you win at burpees. And it's the same thing with life. That's what happens in life. All you do is you fall down, get back up again, fall down, get back up again, fall down, get back up again. That's how you win. Go to it, y'all. Have a good one. Out.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Please stay up there. That's absolutely inspirational. But does that mean if I'm tired of burpees, I'm tired of life? Because that's not good.
Joko has a wonderful video called "Don't Negotiate with Weakness." You should look it up.
Oh no. Don't tell my wife. She'll tell my trainer. I'll be in even more trouble. Any questions from the audience? Anybody inspired to be an astronaut?
So what do you do now with all your time? Like, do you work as a doctor?
Yeah. I was always working the whole time as a doctor and as a researcher.
Okay.
Yeah. This was always a side story, right? I was never planning on being selected, but I was aiming for it, like Anil said.
Thank you very much. It was really cool.
Thank you.
Giving you to a German medical student. She's probably inspired to be an astronaut now.
Thank you. Would it have made a difference for you if you wouldn't have failed the medical test, but like the psychological test or the interviews or something like that?
So you're asking about how I feel that I failed the medical test, something that was not completely in my control. Yeah, it is what it is. I think I would have felt worse if I had failed an interview, for example. The interview I've been through went quite well because I was prepared, but I would have felt a stronger sense of failure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
How many children do you have?
I have 0 children.
I thought that.
Yeah. It's very hard, but a lot of the candidates did have kids. Marcus has kids. Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's amazing. I find tales like that absolutely inspirational. It's not about where you necessarily end up, it's the journey and how you get there. So our next speaker, so this is what, yeah. Our next speaker is a local man, and he started off as in his own words, as a window cleaner. And from the beginnings of a window cleaner and through his aspirations, Gerald Biener has been a pilot for 33 years, and spent 40 years at Air Zermatt. I believe that would make it 7 of those would be window cleaning, and was CEO for the past 12 years. And he has over 16,000 flight hours, which I think in a rotary wing sort of logbook is absolutely amazing. He decided to retire at the age of 60 from being CEO, and now you'll find him training and around the base. And he's last year, I believe you gave some fantastic stories about the Himalayas, and look forward to hearing what you have to say this year.
Hello, everybody. Not sure if it's going to work.
I'll just say one more thing whilst we wait for the AV setup to come up.
Go ahead.
Without your support of Air Zermatt and the support of the sponsors, this simply wouldn't happen. And I want to thank you, because I have to say, I never even considered long lining until I came to Air Zermatt, and now I've seen it, I'm not going to do it.
Why not? Well, it's a big pleasure to have you all here in this beautiful scenery. I see some are quite hanging in the rope, so I guess that was the fondue last night, which was too heavy, I suppose. So I'm the last one. I will just go through what we will see today. I was asked to do a presentation about dynamic hoisting, but I would like to do or to see some other points. Soll ich, hast du einen Trigger oder etwas? Ja. Sonst kann ich hier, mich muss man auch nicht immer sehen. You don't have to see me at all the time. So, I thought it might be interesting to see the question, short haul or helicopter hoist operation. Then dynamic hoisting or tagline. I guess most of you have flown on helicopter and you know what I'm talking about. Then I would like to talk about the training, the communication, the two most important things when you do human external cargo, and then come to a conclusion. So, short haul or hoist. On the beginning, when mountain rescue started, it was never a question if we do it on a fixed rope attached, bless you, underneath the helicopter, or if you use a hoist. This is the first drop of a mountain guide into the famous Eiger North phase, early 70s, where they used a hoist. This picture was made by our former president, Mr. Beat Perren, who was at the same time the hoist operator. So for us, it was basically the only tool we had at disposal at that time was the hoist. This is the first extraction of a victim or a patient from the Eiger North phase in 1972. And the hoist became quite popular, and even in this particular case where they had to evacuate more than 80 people from a blocked cable car, which was blocked really for the whole night, you can immediately see that they were already doing dynamic hoisting, because they were not staying on a spot and waiting until the guy on the hoist has been lifted up to the helicopter. So dynamic hoisting was instantly made by our former pilots. Now I hope it's gonna work. It's not. Jetzt müssen wir gerade helfen. Jetzt muss ich gerade rausgehen aus unserer Präsentation. Heißt
Sie trainieren?
Nein. Da ist zurückgehen. Kannst du da rausgehen, gerade unsere Präsentation? Ask vielleicht. So, we started, jetzt müsste ich mir gerade auf Desktop gehen. We started the human external cargo, the sling, underneath the helicopter with a rope attached to the helicopter in mid-90s, because we were confronted with the limits of a hoist, which was a lateral CFG, and we were limited to a certain weight, up to 120 kilograms. So we decided to try the central hook, where we could lift up to 600 kgs and more people then. Ja, jetzt kannst du mir Gott geben. Jetzt geht's dann. No. And we use this particular system for evacuations of cable cars. Because there you can imagine, once you are blocked for several hours, it's quite difficult. And if you go with a hoist and you do one by one and you have up to 200 people blocked in a cable car, you can see that this takes days to get everybody out. So, weißt du, so schloss nur. That's okay. Kannst nur zurück in die Dings gehen. So, for these cable car evacuations, we figured out that with 3 mountain rescuers on scene, and you can place them on a chairlift, and then the next one on a gondola, and then on a chairlift, you will be able to evacuate up to 200 persons per hour with 2 helicopters and 6 mountain rescuers. So the technique was quite useful, because you can go up to 6 passengers, and it was a big advantage versus the hoist. Hello, Nor. We can just go further. Continue. There is another
Sie trainieren und testen in eisiger Höhe auf über 6000 Meter in dünner Luft.
So the second possibility where it makes sense is in the Himalayas. Why? Because the hoist is quite heavy, and you need a hoist operator. So including with the hoist operator, you have an additional 120 to 180 kilograms where you have to carry. So in the Himalayas, it makes sense. This was an accident during our training we made with the Nepali pilots. They were simply not finished at that time, unfortunately. Otherwise, they would still be here. So in the Himalayas, we did not implement the hoist, but the human external cargo sling technique instead, because of these reasons. Weight, and of course also costs. And there are a few more factors which are, you know, when you have the complexity of a hoist, there are much more things who can go wrong. You are a 2 crew, you have a technical things who can go wrong. And with this simple rope technique, you just need a pilot with a lot of skills. And this is one example we did. This is an Annapurna 2011. This was the highest ever made rescue mission until to date, at the 7,000 meters. We did also extractions on Dhaulagiri. Down here you can see this is Khol Ne. This is at 6,000 meters, and in the back you see Annapurna. So we implemented this system for our Nepali guys, but to do this kind of operation, you need a lot of training. Those who are flying in a helicopter and are performing human external cargo, either hoist or the fixed rope, the short haul technique, they know they are 100% they need to trust the pilot, because the pilot is the one who is the key person, especially during the human external cargo. We had the advantage that we do up to 10,000 cycles per year. This is an example on the Klein Matterhorn. For this pole, we brought up 6,500 concrete flights. So the pilot is used to fly with a load, and he knows the reaction of the load. So this is definitely a big advantage when you have to perform human external cargo, when you have to bring in a doctor or a mountain rescuer. Definitely safety. This is also true for the longer lines, like our pilots. They are not fully rescue pilots. They also do sling operation. So one day you do logging, the next day you pick up a few people in Geneva, and the next day you do rescue missions. So this combination, this variation is definitely an increase in safety, because you have training on job where you can use this experience later on when you have a very difficult rescue mission. So whenever you hear or whenever you do human external cargo operations, hoist or fixed rope, training is the key. Training is the most important thing. And many years ago, we decided with FOCA together that we need some entry minimum requirements for pilots before they can carry someone on a sling or on a hoist. And you can see the ECS cycles, 500 ECS cycles. That means that you need a certain amount of sling loads prior to use a human to insert somewhere to an accident site. Same goes for the ECS. There, the requirements are a little bit higher. So we developed a syllabus, theoretical and practical syllabus, before someone is allowed to do these external cargo sling operations. Now, dynamic hoisting or tagline. The difference is when you do a static hoist operation, when you lower somebody down and you stay on the spot and you come up again, there are a few points who can be very critical. And I would like to show you the first example is a tagline. So here the helicopter stays on the scene, and the rescuer, you need of course a rescuer who is holding the tagline. You think this is a good technique? Yes. If you want to avoid the spinning, when you have a rescue bag or something and it is spinning like hell, then okay. But you see, the helicopter is quite long and in a stationary flight. So he is self-exposing him to additional risk. Then the rope can get entangled, the rope can get into the tail rotor, and you need somebody on the ground. So for us, it was never, ever, never, ever, ever, ever the question to have a tagline. Never, ever. Because it was frightening to see how these guys are doing the job. This is something I just saw on Vertical Mag. Vertical Magazine should be a professional magazine for helicopter pilots, and they say great example of a tagline, sometimes called a long line in search and rescue. I don't know what the long line terms mean there. And yes, if you are good trained, then of course you can use this system. We had from the armed forces pilots who saw the horn, and there they saw this technique of dynamic hoisting. As soon as we have lifted off the patient and the doctor and we go into forward flight, they thought, why are these guys doing this? You can actually also see it in the back on this video. So there was a pilot, Clayton Horney, from Colorado Army National Guard and the hoist rescue team who came, and he wanted to talk to us. So we had an exchange of experiences. And we also have the US Air Force coming here for doing this dynamic hoist training. Why? It's definitely another reason, because they are a target. Whenever the US Air Force, the PJs, they have to go behind the front lines and extract some injured soldiers, they cannot hover for 3-4 minutes. They would be a perfect target for the enemy. So this is also a reason more. They said, we would like to learn, we would like to see this. And by doing this, Clayton, he made some tests. He also got an analysis done about the pros and the contras. I won't go through all these details, but you can see there are a whole bunch of problems who can occur while doing a regular static hoist mission. This is the downwash of a helicopter. Clayton analyzed the downwash scenario, and you can see as the rotor is spinning, the rotor system is aspiring air, and the airflow going through the rotor system is creating this spin. So everybody who is on the hoist, he's affected by this downwash. As soon as you go forward, slightly forward, this downwash is going. Bring es auch zurück. Yeah. So you see the downwash goes slightly behind the chopper. And if you go with a little bit more speed forward, 30 knots or so, the downwash is completely disappearing. It's going on the backside of the helicopter. Therefore, he also said, you can also use this forward speed on a lateral way by going on that side where the hoist is. So whenever a pilot has to turn around, he should go around the side where the hoist is. Why? Because the downwash will go away on the other side, and the guy on the hoist is not affected. So you will never have this spin. I don't know if you ever have seen this guy with a litter spinning like hell. This is how you can avoid that. Of course, there is another technique and an advantage of the hoist system, that you can, whenever you have something spinning like hell on the hoist, that you can go in forward speed and lower the hoist, get out of this this affected wind, and then you will be fine. So Clayton, he made some trials. I guess he has the load. And even with big helicopters like the Black Hawk, you see the guy on the hoist is not spinning at all, because he's in free air, he's in streamlined air, and this is exactly the critical distance where you can encounter this problem. They also tried to do it on another occasion. This presentation sucks. One last try. Well, they even tried to demonstrate that inside the environment where you have obstacles like trees. How can I get up out from the trees without spinning? Is get out as long as possible, that you have no effect from the downwash. just clear the obstacles and go simply in forward flight. So dynamic hoisting, remember these guys in the 70s, they already did that instinctively. So they made everything right. They immediately went forward, and so they had no spin. And Clayton was the first one who could show us that perfectly with this video. Again. So this would be an example of a dynamic hoist from the view of a hoist operator. Not sure if it's going to work. Mr. Geven er weer droes. Even hier. Here you see basically whenever the doctor and the rescue bag is up in the air and he gives the signal or the communication that everything is fine, then you can go forward. This is this bag you can see in the back from Pucks. And then, of course, this is an advantage of utilizing a hoist, that you can bring everything up and you do not have to do a hover out of ground effect with less references. Here you simply can bring up the doctor and the victim to the skids and you safely can land. The only problem you will have is just when you have a problem with the hoist, a technical problem, but in 99% of the cases, it's absolutely fine. And the use of a hoist is absolutely recommended. Definitely also at night. We tried to do fixed ropes at night, and this is quite dangerous because you have less references. Once you go down to a hut or to a rendezvous place where you want to bring the patient down to the ground. So, Mr. Saldizomo, let's go. Communication. In most of the cases, when you have the possibility to have an integrated helmet or, of course, a radio communication with the pilot, it's a huge advantage. The armed forces, they don't have these at all the time because they have to work with soldiers, with PJs, and so hand signals are very important. But the internal communication between the pilot and the hoist operator is absolutely crucial. And I would like to show you when it's working.
Richard Lehner als Bergspezialist wird an die Seilwinde angehängt.
So here you see the pilot. He's communicating with the hoist operator, and at the same time he's doing a radio check with the mountain guide.
Die Bergsteiger
And
sitzen auf einem kleinen
we also figured out that these helm systems we have are quite good because once the mountain guide or the doctor is on the scene, he can flip up and so he can listen to the patient, and on the other ear he is still connected with the pilot. Because if you see these doctors or mountain rescuers with the pilot helmet, it looks damn good, but it's absolutely, I would say, yeah, either they lose the communication with the pilot or they cannot communicate with the patient. So they scream at the patient. So many times patients said, "Ooh, I was afraid because the doctor was quite angry with me." No. He simply did not hear what the patient wanted to say. So with this system, it's easy. It's much easier to communicate. So communication beside the training is absolutely key and important to have a minimum of safety. Here, the situation is different. You have seen the hoist operator was talking to the pilot and was guiding him in. here, with this is a fixed rope, a long line, where Rebecca is sitting in the back as a basically hoist operator or paramedic, and she's giving me the power indication because I had to look outside and work with the vertical reference to put them onto the ground. Here, the importance was to have the height from that guy on the rope, that he gave me the exact height on the rope. I could see where I wanted to place him, and I had Rebecca talking to me, giving me the power reserve, because we had up to 55 knots here on this accident site. It was last summer, and two guys, they were tumbling down and they were waiting for help. So pressure is on, and you need a perfect crew concept and a good crew to perform such rescue missions. Conclusion, because I guess you want to have another fondue soon. It's 12 o'clock. The conclusion, I would never say that one system is better than the other one. We have, for example, in Austria, ÖMTC using just fixed rope lines, no hoist. In Norway, the same. And here with us, we think that going from one interventions to the next, it is super good to have a hoist. Why? You just can, in the air, you can decide, do we do a hover landing to get the doctor on the scene, or you just want to do a small hoist operation. So you save a lot of time. And definitely also at night, a hoist is the tool to use. So there is not pro or contra. If you have both, it's best. When you have multiple people to evacuate, it's much better with the fixed line. Otherwise, you will have a lot of hoist cycles. The helicopter sling operation or the human cargo sling operation has one disadvantage. You need a pilot with sufficient training and experience. And you also need a mirror. You need the communication tool. Otherwise, it's going to be quite difficult. The hoist has many advantages. It's super expensive. A hoist cycle is very expensive. You need more training, and it's a multi-crew operation where you need to have a perfect communication between the pilot and the hoist operator. And as it is a technical tool, you will also find yourself quite often confronted with technical problems where you have to find a solution. So that's basically my conclusion. If you are using a hoist, dynamic hoisting, it's the way to do, and I would rather not do a hoist operation with a tagline. This was sorry, it was a little bit technical, but Patty told me in the morning that I should prepare a presentation for today. No, it's not
Thank
true.
you very much. That was fantastic. Do you have some questions from the audience? I was just wondering, what are your opinions now? I was enjoying the fondue yesterday and talking to some of our colleagues about some services using hoist operations within an urban environment, within the city. What do you think of that?
Absolutely, absolutely feasible. I mean, I saw in Oslo a presentation of the ambulance system in London, which is absolutely brilliant. And well, they have certain landing spots, but in urban environment, it's absolutely a good tool. You simply need to have a little bit a longer line because the downwash can create damages on the houses, down on the ground. But that's the downwash is really the only thing. All the rest is absolutely positive.
Yeah. I have to say, in London, the most dangerous part of getting to the patient is nothing to do with the helicopters or the pilots. It's the police that drive you from the landing site to there. That's the bit that terrifies me. Any?
Thanks for your talk, Gerald. I'm a hoist operator from down in New Zealand, and in the daytime, definitely agree with the dynamic hoisting. Seems to work with that forward airspeed and not getting a spin on. But we've found that at night, when the hoist operator is under goggles, as well as the pilot, we've kind of moved to just doing static hoisting, just with kind of less visual reference, and the pilot seems to me find it a bit easier to hold their reference. Do you have much experience with nighttime dynamic hoisting, or any thoughts?
So if I got your question right, you were asking for the night.
Yeah, just dynamic hoisting at night. In New Zealand, we've been static hoisting.
Well, it's basically it's exactly the same as during the day. There is always the question: night goggles flipped up or on? I wear them on, and once I'm close to the mountain, or when I do the hoist mission, then I'm on naked eye, what we call it. I do the extraction, and at the same time, I just watch through the night goggles, the environment. I check the environment, and before I do the final approach, which is always dynamic, then as soon as I've cleared the obstacles, I go around the side where the hoist is. And I always go dynamically, always, always. But of course, when you have not 100% good references, it's quite tricky, definitely at night. And on the boat, it's of course it's quite tricky. When you leave the boat, you don't have the light. So you need to have minimum the goggles on, and there also makes sense to have the goggles down. But there, even the specialists are not sure what to do best. What to do is best.
Awesome, thank you. I'll take it back for discussion.
Thank you very, very much. That was incredibly enlightening and interesting. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that brings us sadly to the end of the lectures for TBS24. I would like to say, first of all, I would like to thank you as the audience, because without your participation, your input, and your discussions, this conference simply wouldn't be what it is. And the other things I've already mentioned, our sponsors and Air Zermatt, who make it possible to do this. But what I think really brings the magic to this is the hard work of Mads, Anders, Danny, the back team, Patrick, everybody here. They're the ones that sprinkle the magic dust, and all of our fantastic speakers who bring with them their wealth of knowledge and their excellent insights into their worlds, which I think we all overlap in, and I think it makes for a fantastic time. So thank you to them, and thank you to you. Please give yourselves a round.
Thank you everyone again for a fantastic week. There's actually one more person we need to thank, and that is you, John. Thank you so much for coming back each year. Thank you for taking the time out of your, what I know, your smacked schedule. Much appreciated. So as a sign of our immense appreciation of what you do here, we have a small gift from us in the organizing crew.
So the air is pretty sick. It's now time to say goodbye from this conference room. In 1 year we are back, 3 days earlier, of course. So what's the next steps? For those who are coming to the helicopter base, grab your dominant hand, take the lanyards off, please. Lanyards and downwash is not a good, it's not a good combination. Next one, 12:45 outside, we're heading down to the base. Next step, 1500, we are finished on the base, and we're heading to Zermatt for a nice après ski, say goodbye, and have some drinks, listen to music, Thanks a lot.